clear and strong voice for reason throughout the many, many years that we've been writing and serving as a beacon to the rest of us. So before I go much further, I do need to clarify one point. I mean, you notice the white hair, you notice the white beard. So just to be clear, throughout today's lecture, the guy with the glasses and the smile, that's Dr. Stenger. But in fact, he does tell some pretty eternal truths. That's what physics is about, at least with respect to the universe, as we now know it. And he tells them like this. And the truth is that although we sometimes try to gloss over this, science and religion, when it comes to the natural world, are not compatible ways of viewing the natural world. And when religion makes claims about the natural world, science is in a position to challenge and test and reject those claims. And reject those claims is what it often does. And so we know, for example, as Dr. Stenger has told us, that if you consider the Bible, we start off, and in the very first sentence, the Bible is wrong, right? It's not true, right? We now know that the universe is some 14 billion years old, whereas the Earth didn't show up until about some 10 billion years later. So what's 10 billion years between friends, right? It kind of matters, right? And as knowledge has accumulated over the decades and millennia, most of us now have come to understand that in fact it's just not very plausible that, yes, the Bible really does say this, fruit trees grew on earth before the sun and stars even existed. It didn't show up until later, right? We now understand that the stars were essential not only for the birth of fruit trees, right, but they themselves had to die in order for fruit trees to be born. And knowledge has continued to accumulate. So most of us now understand that the Earth isn't flat, and that the Earth rotates around the sun rather than the other way around, even if it did take till 1992 for the church to vindicate Galileo. We now understand that when it comes to talking snakes and talking donkeys, the Bible is not any more credible source than is Dr. Dolittle or Shrek, right? Although some have argued that there is some reason to believe that God was speaking of his S, as indicated. And most of us now understand when it comes to the weather, right, it's not the case that Yahweh or Thor or Zeus is throwing down thunderbolts in order to strike the wicked, and that when it comes to forest fires, relying on prayer to quench a forest fire is about as reliable as relying on dehydrated water to quench a thirst, unless you happen to be a Republican presidential candidate. But, right? We understand those things. Most of us take them almost for granted. We've forgotten that anybody can think differently. But when it comes to physics, let's be honest, most of us don't really understand physics, because a lot of physics is outside the realm of our natural day-to-day experience. So, right, when we consider atoms, I still can't get over the fact that this floor is 99.9% empty space. Doesn't make sense. We don't experience it that way. We don't understand the origins of the universe, or possibly what could have happened before the origin of the universe. We don't understand the concept of infinity. And so we get bamboozled when other people use that concept incorrectly. And we don't understand the language of physics, which is math, right? We don't understand, we're not always in the ability to assess it realistically. What we do understand, of course, is that there's nothing remotely equivalent to the power, the predictive power, or the elegance of Maxwell's equations revealed in the Bible, which is no surprise because that book represents what we knew 6,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. Right? So, right, physics is the last hiding hole for God of the gaps. And theists also often resort to physics or metaphysics as their last resort. Unfortunately, we have Dr. Stenger to help sort all this out. And so when theists claim whatever begins to exist has a cause, we have Dr. Stenger going, no, right? Physical events at the atomic and subatomic level have no evident cause. And when theists claim you can't create something from nothing, we have Dr. Stenger going, no, actually, remember E equals mc squared, mass can come from energy, the total energy of the universe appears to be zero, and zero doesn't have to come from anything. And when they abuse the second law of thermodynamics, and they claim that order cannot arise from disorder, we have Dr. Stenger to remind us that in fact the universe is expanding, the the total entropy of the universe is increasing, and that's in accord with the second law, but that does not preclude there being an increase in localized order. And of course, then perhaps the very last refuge, that of fine-tuning. That somehow, despite the fact that the universe is 99.9999% totally inhabitable to us as children of God, that it was fine-tuned just for us, right? But as Dr. Stenger has now shown very comprehensively in his book, this too is a fallacy. So, right, science and religion aren't always compatible. They have different ways of determining reality. Religion based on faith, science on empirical evidence. And in many cases, faith promotes ignorance, whereas science promotes progress. And this isn't something that is relevant only to the very distant past. It's not something that's relevant even only to today. It's relevant to our futures. And perhaps as a particularly telling and timely reminder on this near anniversary, as Dr. Stenger has said, never forget, science flies you to the moon too often, religion flies you into buildings. So, Dr. Stenger, thank you so much for coming. A few words about his background. He's an adjunct professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado and emeritus professor of physics at the University of Hawaii. He has also held visiting positions on the faculties of the University of Heidelberg in Germany, Oxford in England, and the University of Florence in Italy. Dr. Stenger's research career spanned the period of great progress in the elementary particle physics that ultimately led to the current standard model. In his last project before retiring, Dr. Stenger collaborated on the underground experiment in Japan that showed for the first time that the neutrino had mass. The Japanese leader of the project shared the 2002 Nobel Prize in Physics for this very important discovery. Dr. Stenger, as we know, has also had a parallel career as an author of 10 critically acclaimed popular level books that interface between physics and cosmology and philosophy, religion, and pseudoscience. His 2007 book, God, the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist, was a New York Times bestseller. His most recent book is The Fallacy of Fine Tuning, and he's also recently published The New Atheism, and I believe that Shift has all of those books available for sale, and for signing and donations would be welcome too. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Stenger. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much for the introduction. Thank you for being here. I know you can be much indulgent, and that's why I consider it a compliment. You'd rather come here to hear me than watch you talking to the speaker. Okay, well, you know, I can use a little light.
Yes.
It is commonly believed that science has nothing to say about God, that it can't prove or disprove the existence of God. Even the prominent new atheists, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, who were supposedly so stridently anti-religious, have actually said this. Science can't prove or disprove the existence of God. I try to convince you that this is wrong. But I'm actually more extreme than they are. While it's true, of course, that we can't disprove the existence of every conceivable God, this is not the case for God with the attributes of the Abrahamic God, the God worshipped by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Such a God is believed to play such an important role in the universe, the operation of the universe, the lives of humans, that his existence should have been confirmed by now. Even the most pious believer has to admit that there's no scientific evidence for God. If there were, it would be the textbooks along with the evidence for neutrinos and DNA. But then people will say, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. However, this isn't always true. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence when the evidence should be there and is not there. The absence of evidence for elephants, let's say, in Rocky Mountain National Park, droppings, crushed bushes, and so on. No one's found such evidence. That can be taken as a good sign that there are any elephants in Rocky Mountain National Park. Now let me give you some examples of the absence of evidence for the Judeo-Christian Islamic God. If such a God existed, we would see the evidence that he answers prayers. Now, reputable scientists from reputable institutions such as the Mayo Clinic, Harvard, and Duke universities have done carefully controlled experiments on the efficacy of prayer, and they haven't found it. Now, with billions of prayers being said every day, you would think that by now a few of them would have been answered. Now, most religions teach that in addition to our physical senses, we possess another inner sense that provides knowledge of a world beyond the natural world. Now, if God reveals truths by such means, we should be able to verify at least some of these truths. For example, if God inspired the Bible, you would think it would have provided he would have provided it with correct information about the world, such as the fact that the earth moves around the sun, and complex life evolved from simpler forms. Instead, the Bible is filled with errors and contradictions that put the whole value of it into question. Indeed, the absence of evidence that should be there makes the major stories of the Bible almost certainly mythical. This includes the most important events in both the Old and New Testaments. There's no archaeological evidence, which should be there, for the Exodus, for the Battle of Jericho, for the great empire of David and Solomon. No one has found a trace of Solomon's temple. In the case of the New Testament, if Jesus was such an important figure, as the Gospels claim, why is there no mention of him by Roman historians writing events during his lifetime? Some actually living in Jerusalem. Indeed, we can almost rule out beyond a reasonable doubt that the Gospel versions of the Nativity and Crucifixion are wrong. We almost rule them out. Neither Bethlehem nor Nazareth appear to have been occupied at the time of Jesus. There isn't a single shred of evidence independent of Christian literature that the Jesus described in the Gospels never existed. No, I'm not claiming that there wasn't some historical figure that the Gospel myths were based on. I'm not claiming I can prove that, but no one can prove that there was. Now, since I'm here in Utah, it's preferable to avoid mentioning Mormonism. Now, I'm sure that there isn't anyone in this audience who knows less about Mormonism than I do, so I leave it for you to decide for yourselves about whether or not Mormon beliefs are in conflict with archaeological science. Now let's move from the past to the present and our own observations. Many people claim to have had religious experiences. If God or the supernatural is glimpsed in a religious experience, we should be able to confirm that by some verifiable fact. Not in everyone, but at least one out of the millions that have claimed one or two. For example, someone might return from a religious experience with knowledge of an impending disaster that no one could have predicted, which then takes place on schedule. Nothing of this sort has ever happened. No one predicted the Japanese tsunami or Hurricane Irene until some evidence appeared. Of course, if he wanted to, God could appear before us at any time and perform a few miracles to prove his existence. But that would be crass, so let's assume he's more subtle.